This is Christian Gomez with the New American Magazine, and today we'll be discussing the Convention of States and their resolution that's currently pending, one of their many resolutions that is currently pending in the Iowa Legislature, House Joint Resolution number 7, which applies to Congress for a constitutional convention to propose amendments to the U.S. Constitution. And joining us today to discuss this resolution and the tactics being used to promote it in the state is Iowa State Legislator, State Representative Helena Hayes. Representative Hayes, thank you for joining us today here at the New American.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So I understand that, by the way, as we're recording this, it is Tuesday, the day before a vote that is scheduled on Wednesday, tomorrow, in the Iowa State Legislature, specifically in the Iowa House of Representatives, where you serve, on House Joint Resolution number 7. Now, in trying to get all of your colleagues and yourself to vote for it, you've been getting quite a few phone calls, even today, on the eve of the vote and debate from Convention of States. Can you tell us a little bit about these phone calls, who called you, and what they're saying in these messages?
Yeah, well, one of the things that caught me a little bit by surprise is a text I got. And if I could just give you a little bit of background about my story, a couple of years ago at the Iowa State Fair, and everybody here loves and knows well the Iowa State Fair, the Convention of States had a large booth, and they were getting signatures for their petition at that time. And I, like hundreds and hundreds, thousands actually, people that walked by that booth were, happily grabbed by somebody out of the booth and told, hey, do you think we've got a problem in the federal government, and do we need to rein in the federal government? And of course, most people say, yes, actually we do. And we were presented with the petition. Well, here's a solution. Let's have a convention. Would you like to sign up? And there were, sheets clear across the booth, and we could sign up. And I did so at that time. And not really knowing very much about it. But since then, I've done a lot of research, especially now that I'm in an elected position that I'm in. And I'm a freshman here in the Iowa Legislature. I'm new this year. I've been doing this just the last couple of months, and I'm fairly new into politics in general. And I will be glad to admit that, because I'm one of many Americans who have been, kind of red-pilled, I would say. We've been awakened to what's going on around us, and we have stepped into politics when we were previously just busy raising families and working and doing what we need to do. So today, in this role that I've been in, just remember my name was on that petition, and it's remained on that petition, despite the fact that over the years, as I have done my own research and dug into a constitutional convention, I have changed my mind, and I regret signing that petition, like quite a few people. But my name remains in their database. So today, as a representative, I received one of their mass texts that they send out to people that have signed that petition. And surprisingly, in that text was my personal cell phone number saying, hey, contact your state representative, Helena Hayes, at this phone number. And I was a little bit surprised. It was my phone number, the over. And I reached out to COS to ask them, why they would include somebody's personal information on a mass text and where they got that information. And I was told by COS that they did get it out of a directory that our legislative agency, our LSA, Legislative Service Agency, puts out. But generally, national groups like that will use, your legislative phone number and your legislative email when instructing people to contact their elected representatives, simply for privacy reasons and simply so that they can protect, people from bombing their phones and their emails, especially on a personal basis. So that really took me by surprise today. That's been the latest thing, but I'll tell you about a few more things if you'd like me to.
Absolutely, please.
Well, I have had a phone call recently with several people with COS about, they've come to us. They've spent a lot of time here at the Capitol reaching out to legislators on both chambers, and we're in the House right now, in the Senate and the House, just seeing if we have any questions and encouraging us to vote. And I've attended some events too that speakers with COS have traveled to Iowa for, and they've been public events. And I'm quite disappointed in a lot of those conversations because I'm experiencing a lot of character assassinations. Basically, they have been making statements that about the opposition, let's say John Birch Society for one of them, that claims that they are incapable of making these kinds of statements about a convention, and personally attacking and assassinating the character of individuals in these groups that oppose
such as
COS.
Robert Brown, who we've had on the show many times here at the New American.
Very much so. And that's been disappointing because it's one thing for us to disagree on issues, but it's another to attack the person personally and put them down so that you try to change the opinion of somebody about the issue, which that's not very good. It's not very good tactics. Let's stay within the issue and let's stay within the topic. So that has happened quite often. As a matter of fact, I would dare say that they've, and it isn't word for word, but they basically kind of said that if you don't agree with the Constitutional Convention, you're an idiot. And,
Wow.
You don't want to call people names like that because there's a lot of good people on both sides of the aisle.
So rather than actually debating the merits, from their point of view, the merits of the convention, they would rather spend the majority of their time attacking the John Birch Society and other groups and organizations that oppose the convention, character assassinating Robert Brown. I understand that you received a specific phone call from one of the top COS leaders today. Who was that, and what was he telling you today?
Well, that was the founder of COS. And he was reaching out to me to see if I had any questions because we were going to be looking at this tomorrow. We'll be debating it in caucus, and then if it gets that far, perhaps on the floor. Just seeing if I had any questions and concerns. And I did share with him that I was not in favor of a convention at this time. And yeah, and I didn't even bring up JBS, or I didn't even bring up anybody, but he automatically went to the opposition and basically said that, yeah, Robert Brown was just a house painter. And why would you believe a house painter? And then proceeded to remind me of all the letters after his name and some of the places that he has been published in terms of papers and things like that. And I don't doubt he's not a very intelligent man, a very good man. I have high respect for him. I just don't think that is a very, we don't need to attack each other personally. And certainly we both know that just because somebody may not have a bunch of letters after their name does not mean that they are intelligent, and does not mean that they don't understand an issue very well.
And of course, that also presupposes the idea that one must be an attorney to understand the Constitution, when in fact it was written for the average American to read. Even the Federalist Papers themselves were published in the newspapers in New York for the average New Yorker, average citizen, to be able to read and understand the Constitution. So this idea that you have to be a constitutional attorney, an expert with various letters behind your name, is kind of a diss, you could say, to the American people and the intelligence of the average American. So it's really sad that they would take that line of attack against someone like Robert Brown, or anyone else who has a different opinion that they do. What other sort of tactics have you seen from the Convention of States to try to convince you and even your constituents to support their application? Haven't they sent some mailers recently to where you live?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I have some with me. We've gotten several in envelopes that are bright colored and no return addresses on them. And if you don't mind, I'll read to you a little bit about what's on them. But they do have a little picture of Snow White. Yeah, Snow White and the witch and the poison apple. And on top of the poison apple is the letters JBS. And this isn't all of what's on there, but it does say at the bottom, the liberal fear argument of a con and runaway worked so good, the father of lies actually got you to rescind 8 of the 19 right to life amendments. You have been so paralyzed in fear, you allowed 60 million unborn children to be murdered. So fearful is this generation that tyranny and total slavery to the spirit of the age is almost complete. Bite the fruit of fear and complete the transaction. Come bite the fruit and wear your millstone proudly.
Of course, the
it's
father
kind of
of
strange. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say the father of lies is a biblical reference to Lucifer, to Satan. So they're essentially calling the John Birch Society and Eagle Forum and anyone that's worked to rescind convention applications in the past, regardless of the desired amendment, as being the father of lies then.
Yeah, it's just a strange esoteric kind of message. As a matter of fact, the first one I got, I kind of just glanced at it and then I didn't even really read it. But then I got a second one about 2 weeks later, and I actually did try to sit down and read it and kind of was confused because the point is, yeah, it's a bit esoteric, I would say. So, but it clearly has, I didn't tell you this, but on Snow White, across the front of her dress is conservatives, and the apple represents JBS. So basically saying, you conservatives, if you take a bite of the apple, which means, take of JBS and believe what they are saying, you are taking of poison and you will die. Wow. So yeah, we're getting these kinds of things. And instead of just perhaps given, hey, here's the why we need to do this. Here's, obviously we all agree. We all agree we have a problem. We all agree federal government is an issue. I would definitely say when I door knocked in my primary and in my general last year, that was the number one thing that people brought up, was their concern with what was happening on the federal level in DC. Now with that, I actually kind of, I got tired of hearing that from the doors, and I would eventually take the conversation and I would say, you know what about your community here? What about your school board? What about your county council or your city council? Are you watching those? Are you taking part in your local politics and your local government? And most of those people aren't, because we're all been very disconnected. We're very busy, and about all the information that we get oftentimes is just maybe the nightly news, maybe some social media, but it takes effort, doesn't it, for all of us to educate ourselves and equip ourselves with enough information to make wise decisions. And I know here in the Iowa House, we've had a lot of bills come before us at just as they're going up to debate, and as a freshman, I've experienced how quickly things move through this process, and they do. And we have had to put the brakes on plenty of things already that either people did not fully understand the dangers of, or are making decisions on things that we're not equipped to do at this yet. And so I'm encouraged in seeing a lot of people reach out to me, even going back to my personal cell phone number going out today on a mass text. I immediately received calls, but I found it interesting that I knew most of the people reaching out to me already. They're in my district. So I don't know if they went specifically just out in my district or broader, but the ones that I have received so far, I have known, and I appreciate that. And they've been about 50-50. Some people have said, hey, it sounds like a good idea. I just, if you're kind of not sure which way you want to go, use my vote to vote yes. And then hey, I've been looking at this and I don't think it's such a good idea. What are you going to do? And so, yeah, it's been fascinating all day.
So not even all of the calls that you have been getting because of COS are even in favor of the resolution. That's pretty telling.
Oh, no, absolutely not.
Wow.
No. I would say more of my emails have not been. So, and that's been over the course of the session, actually, because they've been sending things out for months. I've been on this mass text group that I'm on. I've been getting things from them for several months, but this was just the first time that my name and my personal cell number was on there.
Now, before you mentioned the legislature not considering things or shouldn't be considering things that people don't know the full ramifications of, can you just briefly tell us why you plan to vote in opposition to the Convention of States House Joint Resolution number 7? Give us some of the reasons why this is a terrible resolution that you're not in support of.
Wow. I think there are a lot of reasons why. First and foremost, when we look at the problems, oftentimes, and I think this is true with a lot of things that we're presented with, kind of the, what do they call it? The Hegelian dialectics, right? Here's a problem, here's your solution, right? So we've been presented with the problem, which is the federal government that is overreaching. So we all agree on that, like I said earlier. But the question is opening up the Constitution the solution? And as we look at that more, I truly believe that the three things that are in our resolution in Iowa, which is fiscal responsibility, which is also reining in the federal government, and then also term limits, can be handled in other ways rather than just blowing open the Constitution, which many people have equated to a Pandora's box. Now, today I was also told on my phone call by the founder of COS that the pandemic, the pandemic treaty that the UN is wanting to make with Biden currently is one of the reasons why we need to do this. And yes, we obviously need to separate ourselves from the UN. But again, I've often noted that when people want something, it's really easy to use a fear tactic to accomplish that. And in this case, yeah, we all have big problems with the UN telling the United States when and if we are in a pandemic and what to do about that and how to handle that. Yeah, that's a problem. We like our sovereignty, we like our state sovereignty, and we need to maintain that. So clearly, using fear, and that is not one of them. So even as we talk about term limits as one of them, other ways to handle that. Oftentimes when I think of Nancy Pelosi, she comes from a very deep blue district. And even if we do term limits and she's out in say, 6 years or whatever, guess who we're probably going to get from that district?
Someone just as bad as her, maybe worse, probably younger, so they could stay there for the duration of that limited term, right. And the problem perpetuates because it never deals with the substance of the issue, which is the lack of education of the electorate in those particular congressional districts.
Exactly, and that's why the culture itself needs to be changed, and people need to be equipped and educated, and the people can lead. And I'm a prime example of that because I'm a very grassroots kind of person that came to this Iowa House. Like I said, I haven't been in politics long, and this is my first time I've ever run for a political office. And I did it with a limited amount of money and basically starting off with no name in politics. And here I am. I actually replaced, not replaced, but the person I did replace was the chair of the Education Committee and had been here. So to remove an incumbent was an interesting kind of thing too for me, because that's just more difficult to do. So, I don't have a law degree. I'm not a doctor. I've actually been raising my family for the last 20 years. I've got to be blessed to be a stay-at-home mom. But the neat thing about homeschoolers is that they get a second chance at learning everything much better and much deeper. And I've been blessed to get to do that. So my degree is actually in environmental science and biology, which doesn't necessarily lend to anything constitutional wise, but I love my country, I love my God, and I love the people. And that's what we need here, people that will keep the oath that we took to uphold the Constitution and not amend it. And that's what I intend to do.
That's exactly right. It's interesting because you mentioned that in the phone call, you were told that this convention could theoretically be used to rein in the pandemic treaty. Because it's interesting because you even mentioned that the resolution itself mentions the areas that it wants to deal with. So you and all of your colleagues could be reassured that the convention won't run away and discuss other topics. In fact, the explanation contained within HJR 7, for example, reads, "This joint resolution constitutes an application requesting the United States Congress to call a constitutional convention in order to propose amendments to the Constitution of the United States to impose fiscal restraints on the federal government, limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, and limit the terms of office for federal officials and for members of Congress. The resolution constitutes a continuing application to call a constitutional convention." Nowhere there does it mention even the UN pandemic treaty or World Health Organization or any international matters. So if you're being told in the phone call that this convention could also address other areas not even mentioned in the resolution, it makes one wonder what else could the convention talk about. Of course, anyone who has studied the subject of the convention would know that delegates to such a convention would constitute the sovereign will of the people, and as such, your legislature there in Iowa, the Iowa legislature, or even the U.S. Congress could not impose on the delegates any kinds of limitations because the delegates would represent the sovereign will of the people, and as such, they have the power, as mentioned in the Declaration of Independence, to alter or abolish a form of government. So they certainly could talk about other topics, but that's interesting that you would be told, oh, we could rein in the pandemic treaty, when at the same time they're trying to tell you, no, it'll be limited to just the three things contained in the resolution. It's very fascinating.
Well, when I brought that up, the answer was, it's germane. And those of you that know what that word means, if you're in politics, it just means it has to do with the issue. And in a sense it does, because we don't want international government telling our national government, our federal government, what to do, but it actually supersedes the federal government. It's outside of that. It's an international governmental body. So, that when you mentioned delegates too, that has been a great concern of my colleagues here. Is another question they have that makes them very nervous about this is, who will be the delegates? How will they be elected? How are they going to take their oaths, and what are they going to be limited to, and all the things surrounding those particular people. So we don't really have answers for that. There's nowhere that the Constitution says anything about that. So that would have to be, hammered out at some point. And
yeah.
Gosh, you've asked me what are some of the other issues that,
it's interesting.
So you mentioned, oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just stating how it's interesting that he told you that the convention could also deal with the UN pandemic treaty when it wasn't one of the things specifically mentioned. And if you're told it's germane, what else could potentially be germane? One could argue, using lawyer talk, that us mere mortals don't understand, right? That everything is germane to the convention, perhaps.
Yep.
So that's. That's just how that goes. But it's interesting that you mentioned the convention delegates, because Article 5, you're correct, doesn't state how the delegates would be chosen, what their limitations may or may not be. It's interesting because in the 1970s, specifically in 1973 or 74, the U.S. Senate, not the House, but the Senate, passed the Federal Constitutional Convention Procedures Act, and in their proposal for if there were to ever be a constitutional convention, they recommended that the delegates be chosen based off of the Electoral College method, so a combination of population and representation of the whole for the state. So however many number of votes in the Electoral College, say Iowa or California, New York, et cetera, would receive in the Electoral College, that's how many votes they should receive within the convention. Of course, that was just one idea, but to be told that the delegates will be one state, one vote, that cannot be certain because it's not in Article 5, and there are certainly other methods and other ideas that have been debated and considered in the history of the movement for a constitutional convention going back decades. It would likely be discussed again if a new convention were to be convened. Lastly, just before we head out here, is there anything else that you want to mention about the convention of states that you want to let people know about their tactics, about the resolution, or anything else that you want to mention just before we head out?
Well, the things that I have shared with you have been personal to my experience. I do know my colleagues have experienced the same thing. They're very disappointed in the character assassination. So when it comes to what would I like people to know, the truth is nobody is going to educate you but yourself. So everybody needs to put in the effort to study the issues and not just take what they're being told and just run with it without not actually examining the arguments. And I think we would all agree that generations my age and especially younger, we don't know a lot about the Constitution. We don't know a lot about our rights and our freedoms as they are being picked away piece by piece. Now, I think the COS would say, well, that's the reason why we have to have a convention so that we can protect them. But like I said earlier, I took an oath to defend the Constitution and not. Our Constitution works if we would just use it, and we would, we would actually apply it as it is. It's just that it's not being applied and it's not being defended. So does that mean we just throw the baby out with the bathwater? No, we ask ourselves, and this is the question I want everybody to ask themselves. So we have a problem. What is the best solution? There's got to be a solution. And I propose that the people need to get educated and they need to get involved and get engaged in this. And start with that, and we will all be better off for it.
Well, thank you so much. Well said. Education is the solution. So Representative Hayes, thank you so much for your time from your busy schedule to talk with us here today. And of course, we wish you the best of luck in the remainder of the session. And God bless you, your family, and your colleagues there in Iowa. Take care.
Thank you so much for having me.
I certainly would not want a constitutional convention. I mean, whoa. Who knows what would come out of that?
Just imagine if we have a constitutional convention, the number of people who will be unhappy and the number of people who say the results are not valid, and then they'll just ignore the entire Constitution.
What we need are just more people that would read the one we have.
It isn't the Constitution that's the problem. It is the people who ignore the Constitution that usurp power and abuse the constitutional power that they ostensibly have.
If you can't enforce an existing piece of paper, how are you going to enforce a piece of paper that has a little more writing to it? In other words, it's been amended.
It's up to us to hold our elected officials accountable.
What can you do to elect good representatives and senators in your state legislature who understand the Constitution and are willing to take a stand?